You boys be quiet down there!
Welcome back to welcome to a video about a Windows game. Today I'm looking at The Legend of Heroes 5, the last of the 3 Legend of Heroes games in the so-called Gagharv trilogy. I've made videos about the first 2 games in my series, PC-98 Paradise, and I thought I might as well make a video on 5 to complete the trilogy. As much as I'd love to show you the PC-98 version of Legend of Heroes 5, I'm afraid it doesn't exist. The game was released in 1999, and by this time the NEC PC-98 series of PCs was officially dead. Nihon Falcom had already moved over to Windows as their preferred development platform since 1996. So while The Legend of Heroes 3 and 4 were originally made for the PC-98, the original version of 5 was for plain old Windows, and can be run on a modern Windows PC. First, a little about the title. Falcom came up with the English title, A Cagesong of the Ocean, when they first released the game in 1999. But when the game finally got an English localization in 2007, I think they probably made the right move by changing it to simply Song of the Ocean. Cagesong is meant to be a direct translation of the term Oriuta from the Japanese title, Umi no Oriuta. Oriuta isn't an established word in Japanese either, they just made it up by combining the characters for cage and song. So in a way, it's actually quite fitting that they made up a word for the English title as well. I remember buying this game as a young lad studying in Japan in 2001, intrigued to learn just what a cage song is. Even today, I still don't know for sure, but I have some ideas and maybe you have your own. But anyway, let's open the game. It comes in this blue violin box with very little pictures or information on it. Open that up and we have what would normally serve as perfectly adequate outer packaging for the game. The outer box was included with the first edition only. Inside that is a white box. And finally, we're getting somewhere here. It's a registration card. Then, once again, we have a recruitment flyer for Falcom staff. They were always looking for new talent. Then the manual, which is in black and white, except for a few color illustrations toward the front. Then there's a set of 2 bonus discs. Gagharv Sound Trilogy is a collection of remixed tracks from Legend of Heroes 3 and 4 which appeared on other CDs, plus some of the original soundtrack from 5. The other disc, Gagharv Visual Trilogy The Movie, is a Windows CD-ROM containing some opening movies from the games and some desktop wallpapers. My copy of the game is contained on 2 CD-ROMs, but a 1-disc DVD-ROM version was also released simultaneously. The reason I have the CD-ROM version is the same reason why it was released on both CD and DVD in the first place. Like many people at the time, I hadn't yet upgraded to a DVD drive, and my PC only had CD-ROM. Kind of a shame for me because the music in the DVD version has a higher sampling rate, and it is noticeable. But let's install the CD-ROM version anyway. We'll simply run the install.exe contained on the install disk. We get this tiny screen where I'll select install. Remember when application installers used to have these silly repeating backgrounds? That takes me back. Oh no, it says I need 100 megabytes of free hard drive space. I'm not sure I can handle that. Anyway, I'll just install it in the Falcom directory I already have in my program files. If you're running English Windows, by the way, you'll probably get garbled text during the installer, but the game itself should display fine on Windows 10. Both Legend of Heroes 3 and 4 for Windows gave me issues when I tried to install and run them on this same Japanese Windows 10 PC, but 5 worked perfectly right away. There are later releases of the game that are made to support Windows Vista and XP specifically, but this original release meant for Windows 98 or 95 works perfectly for me, go figure. There's also an update patch for the game, still available for download even today on Falcom's official site. But like most of Falcom's patches from back then, they say to only use it if you are experiencing issues, so I won't. That's some amazing confidence they had in their shipped product though. Nowadays you're lucky if a brand new physical game disc even has a working version of the game on it. Apparently though, if you do install the patch, you can then choose to copy the music files to your hard drive instead of having the game load them directly from the game disk as you play. In either case, you still need the game disk inserted in your drive in order to start the game as a form of copy protection. No way anyone will ever get around that. Anyway, let's start the game. Falcom was using a Bertrand Russell quote as sort of a slogan at the time. Knowledge which is felt to be boring is of little use, but knowledge which is assimilated eagerly becomes a permanent possession. Words to live by. No, really they are. From the main menu, let's just start a new game and watch the opening. It tells the legend of an ancient tribe who lived by the ocean and used songs as a form of energy. Next comes one of those upbeat Falcom openings showing the characters. First of all, we have Fort and Una. And oh man, I think some people are going to have issues with how I pronounce these names. Some may call her Yuna, but I generally use the original Japanese pronunciation as a guide, and in Japanese, it's Una. As for Fort, it's probably for the best that they decided to just spell it Forte in the English PSP version, since his name is supposed to come from the musical term, but in Japanese it's just Fort, which, I don't know, is maybe supposed to be the masculine version of Forte in French? Huh? Anyway, I hope you won't be annoyed too much by me calling them Fort and Una throughout the video. To me, these two are basically just Chris and Julio from 3 all over again. They really don't have a lot of personality to set them apart. I guess if I had to point out differences, Chris is a year older than Julio and still sees him as sort of a little kid. There was definitely little mention of any romance between them. But in 5, Una totally has the hots for Fort, and she is constantly looking for the right moment to tell him how she feels throughout the entire game. Hey, they did the exact same thing again in 6. Moving on, we have Jan and Rick. Jan is Fort's dog, and early in the game he's joined by a flying squirrel named Rick who rides on his head. The two of them fill a single character slot and act as one character. They also follow your lead character as you walk around. Maybe this is where Bandai got the idea for the pet system in the PSP versions. Last, but definitely not least, we have the leader, Fort's grandfather, McBain.
Ooh, McBain.
He's a feisty old man whose powerful punch can even break through walls. Together they form a group of traveling minstrels called the McBain Troupe. Fort plays the kitara, which is this world's version of a guitar or maybe a lute. Una plays the piccolo, McBain plays the harp, and Jan and Rick, dance around while they play. I think it would be kind of cute if Jan barked along. As you may have guessed, the theme of this game revolves heavily around music, which is quite fitting for a game company known for their soundtracks. The adventure begins when McBain and crew find a magic ticket.
Magic ticket my ass, McBain!
Whoops, I meant to say they find a magic map in the old lighthouse in their village. The map shows the locations of 24 resonance stones left by a famous musician named Leone, and the map really is magic. It always shows the current location of the stones, even if they're moved around. This thing has got frickin' GPS, man. McBain has been a traveling musician throughout his life and has been on many journeys around the world.
The rules that constrain other men mean nothing to McBain.
But he desperately wants to have one last journey before he dies. Seeking out the resonance stones will surely become the journey of a lifetime. Whereas in most RPGs, it's the kids who want to set off on a journey. In this game, Fort's parents ask him to accompany his grandfather, and Fort actually protests a little. Ah, do I really have to go along with Grandpa? Since Fort is going, Una decides to go too, and of course they've got to bring the dog, right? I remember when I first played this game over 20 years ago as a young adult, I found it really weird that they have an old man in the party the whole time. It's a party with adult supervision. That's no fun. But now that I'm getting pretty old myself, it really doesn't seem that weird anymore. I think it's cute that Fort goes along with his grandpa on his quest. Before setting off, one setting you might want to mess with is the frame rate. I like to use the default rate, but change the sync setting from auto to synced. Then the game runs silky smooth on a modern PC, or at least it does on mine. I don't remember it running this well back in the day. The only resolution available is 640 by 480, which was a pretty common resolution for games from this time. Depending on your graphics card and monitor, it might display like this. Luckily it displays in the proper aspect ratio with my setup. You can also change the music to MIDI if you want. Apparently some of the MIDI versions have longer compositions, but personally I prefer to just stick to the fully recorded wave music. The MIDI, as far as I know, was meant to be just played with the default synthesizer on your PC, rather than any fancy MIDI modules, so I won't bother getting out the CM300 this time. The main reason many Windows games used to offer a MIDI option is because playing back pre-recorded audio was actually a pretty system-intensive task for lower-end machines at the time, and could hinder performance. MIDI was meant to be the lighter option. The Legend of Heroes 5 is one of the first original games that current Falcom president Toshihiro Kondo worked on after joining the company. He's mentioned in interviews that The Legend of Heroes 3 was his favorite game before joining, and he even had his own fan webpage about the game. Therefore, I guess it's no surprise that after the PC-98 version of 4 took quite a detour, with 5 they decided to bring things back around and make a game very similar to 3. The game's theme, progression, and general rhythm to it all feel very much like 3. In that game, you're following the trail left behind by the White Witch, and in 5, you're following the trail left behind by the composer Leone. This game even uses the exact same engine as the Windows version of 3, released earlier the same year. So of course the battle system is virtually identical, and once again the BGM lets us know that this isn't meant to be taken very seriously, as we watch Jan go around kicking the enemies with his hind legs. This isn't an RPG, it's a circus. Jan and Rick also act as the healer, with a spell that basically translates to lick cure. So yes, the dog heals the other characters by licking them.
Get hot water, get some disinfectant, get some iodine!
Like the other two Windows games, the battle system generally works pretty well, but there are lots of ways that the auto-battle AI could fight more efficiently. It also waits too long to heal the characters, in my opinion. I found myself using manual commands a lot, especially during the later parts of the game. One thing that's really annoying is that if a character gets hit before executing a command you entered, they'll often reset back to doing whatever stupid thing they feel like. Getting hit makes them think they have license to just ignore your orders. As the party finds the resonance stones throughout the journey, equipping them allows the characters to use different magic spells. Maybe these stones are sort of a precursor to the quartzes in the Trails series. One thing that's different from 3 and 4 though is that they removed the multi-level terrain in this one. It's all flat and you can't step up and down like you can in the other two. There's also a ton of secrets hidden in the walls. Some where you use McBain's punch to destroy suspicious looking spots, and others where you simply walk through the wall. I was using an online guide to find these, but I can't imagine how anyone managed to notice all these in the first place. Someone must have wasted a lot of time ramming their character into all the walls in the game. Like 3 and the Windows version of 4, there are books to collect, and some of them are also quite hard to find, requiring you to talk to a certain character at a very specific time in the story. If you do manage to find all the books, you can trade them for some kinda good equipment at the very end of the game. You can also do this in the other Gagharv games that have books, and one mistake I made in my Legend of Heroes 3 video was saying that you don't get anything for collecting all of them. You actually do. In 5, one way you can get some of the books you missed is by winning them at the casino, by playing poker, blackjack, or roulette. In addition to finding Leone's resonance stones, one of the party's main goals, at least in the earlier parts of the game, is performing their music in each of the towns they visit. You'll learn new pieces of music throughout the journey that you can select when it comes time to perform. It doesn't matter which you choose, but it's fun to hear the different pieces they play. The party will also meet other musicians who have their own pieces of music to share.
Not bad for such a brief stage career.
On the topic of music, let's talk about the soundtrack. Of course, I'm bummed that there's no FM sound version, but the tracks are all quite memorable, and the arrangements are nice. Once again, one of the boss BGMs was later remixed and used in the PSP fighting game, Ys vs. Sora no Kiseki Alternative Saga. And the end boss BGM seems to get a fair bit of love from RPG fans for its pure epicness. There's also one battle BGM which contains a phrase that sounds suspiciously similar to a much more well-known track from the Trails series. But my personal favorite track is probably an unusual choice. The Battle Clear BGM has a weird fast melody, played with some cheap synthy sounds. I like the retro feel and would have loved to hear this on the PC-98. Whereas in Chris and Julio's adventure, they met many characters to temporarily fill the 3rd and 4th character slots, the McBain troupe already has 4 characters. They meet others to fill the 5th and 6th slots. So that's right, Legend of Heroes 5 has a maximum of 6 characters, all fighting at once. The first characters to join are an old friend of McBain's named Xiao, who plays the accordion, and his daughter Rachel, who sings. Some of the other important characters include Aida, the daughter of a puppet maker. She creates mechanical puppets that fight for her in battle. Be sure to manually unleash her puppet at the beginning of every battle she's in, cause it's way overpowered and yet costs hardly any MP. Lastly, I'll mention Arya, a beautiful young woman whose singing has mysterious power. Of course, she becomes somewhat important to the story later on. Just like 3, The Legend of Heroes 5 is a relaxing, whimsical journey. Only in the Legend of Heroes games will you so often hear characters comment to their host about how good the food or the tea is. It continues even today in the Trails games, and this all started with 3. Everything in 3 and 5 is almost always pleasant, but this all changes halfway through 5 when it dramatically switches gears and things get serious.
Recently, certain things have become unpleasant.
You see, The Legend of Heroes 3 actually takes place after 5 chronologically, so in addition to being a fun little tale of traveling musicians, 5 is a full-fledged prequel to 3, and the villains at the very end of 3 were literally plotting the end of the world, so the second half of 5 is dedicated to further explaining what that was all about, and deals with some pretty heavy material. Musical performances will suddenly become a rare event, and even the battle BGM changes to let you know things are serious now. The battles actually do get a lot harder. The Windows versions of both 3 and 4 had some balance issues in my opinion. In 3, the battles generally felt a little too easy, and in 4, the random battles are also easy, but the bosses are way too hard. They felt almost unfair, really. But in 5, the difficulty curve is pretty smooth. When the game is hard, it feels like a worthy challenge rather than just cheap. The only battles that got my blood boiling a bit were at the very end, and that's to be expected, I guess. Oh yeah, and
We kill pirates.
5 is probably the longest of the trilogy, and I thoroughly enjoyed just about every minute of this playthrough. My main impression from playing through it 20 years ago was that it was a pretty dull game, without much fighting or dungeons, but that shows how little I actually remembered. This game has plenty of dungeons, certainly a lot more than 3, though it could certainly be said that the game starts out slow, probably boring the hell out of most players who try it. Those who stick with it will get to see it brilliantly crescendo into something epic. This is kind of Falcom's forgotten masterpiece, in a way. Okay, calling it a masterpiece may be a bit much, and it's certainly not completely forgotten since hell there's a port of this game on the fricking PSP, and in English no less. But still, I rarely hear mention of McBain and his musical troupe from Falcom fans.
My mighty heart is breaking.
Chris and Julio get a lot more love, and even Avon and Mile as well. Guess Fort and Una were just a little too bland. But even if it isn't a masterpiece, this was one of Falcom's last games done completely in 2D pixel graphics. At least you could say it's their last RPG that wasn't a remake, and had the traditional little Falcom sprite characters that look like this. It's the end of an era, in a way. By this time, Falcom had perfected the art of making these characters spin and dance around the screen, so that you know you're playing a Falcom game. I get the impression the people who made this probably thought they were making the company's magnum opus. After all, this game was released during what most fans consider to be Falcom's dark era, where they released very few original games, and the ones they did release looked quite old school for their time, like this one. Most people, including myself, assumed the company would go bankrupt or get swallowed up by a larger game company, similar to what happened to so many other classic developers around the turn of the century. But luckily that didn't happen, and President Kondo and company eventually managed to turn things around and make the company stronger than ever. I want to save spoilers for the very end of the video, so before that, let's take a look at the only port of The Legend of Heroes 5 ever released. I can still hardly believe that any port of this game actually exists. 3 and 4 I can kind of understand, but I always thought of 5 as this weird obscure game from 1999 that nobody played. Anyway, if you've seen the other two games on the PSP, then you know pretty much what to expect here. Like 4, it's similar to the Windows version in many ways, even a lot of the music is exactly the same. But once again, they've changed the battle BGM in order to make things feel a little more serious. I don't know, I mean, even if you change the music, one of the characters is still a dog. The somewhat bland battle system in these PSP games unfortunately seems to only allow for up to 4 characters fighting at a time. You can have 6 characters in your party, but can only select 4 of them to fight. By far the coolest addition in this version is an extra mode where you can load your data from the other 2 PSP games, and use any of your characters from the 3 games together in special areas and battles. Let's go back to the Windows version of 5 to talk more about the story. The later section of the game is fascinating, story-wise. Probably the most interesting the Gagharv trilogy ever gets, in my personal opinion, and I really want to talk about it. So consider this to be a major spoiler warning. Do not watch the rest of the video unless you're ready to see spoilers for not only 5, but the entire Gagharv trilogy. Are you ready? So here we go. A little over halfway through the game, the McBain troupe meets the wizard Michelle from 4, and the characters see Gagharv for the first time and the 3 separate worlds of the trilogy. Tiriswheel, which is the world of Legend of Heroes 3, El Fildin from 4, and their standing in Veltluna from 5. The 3 worlds are completely cut off from each other, and no one in the 3 worlds is even aware the other 2 worlds exist. By the way, I really love that each of the 3 games takes place in its own unique world with its own graphics and music and everything. Anyway, it is said that the 3 worlds used to be one, but 950 years ago, El Fildin and Tiriswheel were separated by the great chasm known as Gagharv, and Veltluna was separated by an impassable mountain range known as the Great Serpent's Backbone. Only a few characters have recently learned how to travel between the 3 worlds. Michelle introduces the party to Captain Thomas, who has been exploring the different worlds along with him, as well as the stars of The Legend of Heroes 4, Avon and Mile. These 4 characters will intermittently join the party for much of the later part of the game, even causing Jan and Rick to get kicked out by the end.
No dogs allowed.
We learn that some of the melodies used by the ancient sea tribe for energy over 950 years ago turned out to contain harmful frequencies that caused an expanding floating mass of dark energy to accumulate in the sky. But just in the nick of time, they discovered a parallel alternate world where they could send the dark energy in order to save their own. This caused a huge explosion known as the Wave of Raoul, which created Gagharv and divided the world. The party travels to the alternate world in the second last chapter. There they meet Revus, the main villain of 3, and the end boss of 3, Queen Isabel, as a young child. Isabel also has a sister, who was to be killed according to the traditions of their kingdom, in order to eliminate any questions over legitimacy to the throne. But this sister was rescued and taken away by Leone, the famous composer who created the 24 Resonance Stones. Leone was the only human who found a way to travel to the alternate world after creating the Resonance Stones, and now lives in the dark region of the alternate world along with the girl. In 5, her name is never actually mentioned, but obviously this girl is Geld, the titular White Witch from Legend of Heroes 3, who will later travel to Tiriswheel, setting up Chris and Julio's adventure. The game ends when Fort and the others use a sacred melody to destroy another mass of dark energy which had accumulated over present-day Veltluna, but while in the alternate world earlier, they saw an even bigger mass of dark energy known as the Moon of the alternate world. Michelle prophetically explains that by destroying the black mass over Veltluna, they also reduced the size of this moon, but at best, they've only bought themselves some time. The people of the alternate world may one day choose to save themselves by sending it to the human dimension as another wave of Raoul, which is exactly what the villains attempt to do in 3.
Quit throwing your garbage into our dimension.
And so Michelle will return to his homeland of Tiriswheel to prepare. He destroys the Resonance Stones at Leone's request and turns them into the sacred dagger which Chris and Julio are required to carry with them during their pilgrimage in 3. Una finally confesses her feelings to Fort, and Fort says that he plans to travel to the other lands on the other side of the Serpent's Backbone, and there's even evidence that he made it there. The traveling minstrel we meet in 3 plays one of the same melodies on his guitarra that Fort also plays in 5, with slight differences in the melody. Was this an ancient melody that was passed down from when the world was still whole, or did Fort or someone else manage to bring this melody across the Great Serpent's backbone? According to Japanese Wikipedia, you can even see Fort in Legend of Heroes 3. At first I wasn't convinced that this organ player isn't just another character who also happens to be named Fort. In the English localization they didn't even give him the same name, but then I noticed that the melody he plays on the organ is the same as the one hidden in Leona's resonance stones in 5. That's one hell of an Easter egg for fans who are paying attention. They took a random NPC and melody from 3 and made them super important in 5. But I think I've geeked out far too much about the Gagharv trilogy for one video, so I'll end it here. Now that I've made videos about all the Legend of Heroes games up to 5, I suppose the obvious question is, will I make a video about 6? The answer is no, at least not in the near future. Trails in the Sky has already been talked about to death in my opinion, so my next video will be something completely unrelated to Legend of Heroes. Until then, I'd like to give a special shout out to my patrons on Patreon, and a thank you to everyone for watching. I'll see you again in my next video.